Well, I'm going to get into that because I think we are going to get into some of the changes and stuff. But here's what I want to talk about, because when we're talking about like vinyl, everything is about timelines, and as it should be, because when for our audience, we're record labels and we are dealing with timelines and we're trying to get better at dealing with timelines because we have this like, this pinnacle date, a release date, which is so important, yet not really that important. But anyhow, we're dealing with all these timelines. The reason why I actually sent you an email about 3 or 4 months ago to do this was because of this like bizarre out of body, out of this universe experience I had with your company, which was my last record, which came out of nowhere. It was just this fun exercise of I wrote these songs in a weekend, and I thought, I wonder if I could record them really quickly whilst I was working on another record. And I ended up writing and recording this album in 10 days in March. And I had the masters sent to you guys 10 days, I think 11 days after I had started writing the song. So in 11, from the 11th day, the songs didn't exist 11 days earlier. I sent you the masters. Wow. This is in March, middle of March. I ended up getting the record from you guys, 2 different color variants, clear and splatter, 5 days before the album came out in June. So March, April, May, and June. So about 3.5, no, not March, because it was the middle of March. So it was mostly just April, May, June. So it was about 2.5 to 3 months. How is that possible? Like, that blew my mind. It came in my hands before the release day. It blew my mind. I was telling everybody about it because not 6 months earlier, everyone was like, lead times are now 13 months, 14 months, 18 months. So what happened there? I like to think it was just because I'm a VIP. So, but please.
Well, certainly there were some red carpets we rolled out for all of, for all the cutting and plating work and everything else for you. Aside from you being a very important person, the industry has just gone through a couple of, cartwheels since we last spoke. And most recently, I mean, we're getting out of the pandemic to some extent. Obviously, it's ongoing, but I'll just sort of use the sort of like rough pre and post tense for the sake of this conversation. It felt like every day was quicksand for us during the pandemic because everything was just sort of like shifting and moving under our feet. All of the raw materials we needed for vinyl, like let's take the compound, the PVC compound used to make vinyl.
Yeah.
Basically, the whole industry gets it from overseas. Well, let's say 90 to 95% of it comes from overseas, which means it was arriving on this continent via, ocean freight. And it was a really well-known story over the pandemic that shipping containers were a disaster. That they would let's say they were supposed to show up in 5 to 6 weeks. Sometimes they would show up in 10 to 13. There'd be nothing we could do about it. And that's because, the whole world essentially switched from flying things over by air to ocean. So that was just one more sort of bottleneck that we were experiencing on the logistical side of making vinyl. So we'd go to make yellow records and it would be like, man, how about green? It would be those sorts of situations where we were just getting, whiplash from all the various sort of supply chain problems that everyone was dealing with. But then those dried up, and when those dried up, it meant that we could resume normal operations and we got through those bottlenecks. And that's not just Precision. That was basically the whole industry. We were all dealing with like those material problems and shortage too, where like we would order board to make record jackets and it just wasn't available. And there was all kinds of staffing issues and stuff. I mean, all that stuff is now well in the rearview mirror. And so no one is dealing with that in today's environment of making vinyl. So things have just radically changed. It went from being a functional environment to a dysfunctional environment back to a functional environment. So, it took a few months for that to work itself through. But now that we're there, things are much quicker. And so the turnarounds, whereas, they used to be something like 5 to 6 months, and that was us. I mean, we're a big plant. We have, 35 record presses. That's, that makes us, a very large, if not the largest record pressing plant in North America. Most plants will have between, 2 to 5 record presses, right?
Ah,
So, essentially we just invested in tons of firepower over the pandemic because there were so many record labels pushing us for more, considering that no one could get vinyl made in an appropriate time scale. So anyway, we emerged from the pandemic with, lots of record presses, lots of capacity. And when we got through those bottlenecks, I mean, everything just started to kind of like come back to like a more clockwork way of doing things, and that's where we are now.
that's good to know. And were you hopeful for how things were looking? Like things were looking positive before the pandemic. Is that not true?
Well, positive, just in like
Just in the
in
like,
this
sorry, in lead
volume
times and yeah,
interest.
and yeah,
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I mean, when we started it was 8 weeks,
hmm,
and then it just kept ballooning. Every couple of months was like a fresh exhale into the balloon where it would just sort of
yeah,
expand. It would become 10 weeks, 12 weeks, 15 weeks. And yeah, now it's like one of those return to normalcy type of conversations, except, things are sort of, I don't know about permanently different, but, it's sort of like a shade of the past with like a newer sort of like a reality, I would say. I mean, one big change too is that the volume just exploded between 2020 to 2022.
yeah,
And there's like a correction now because naturally the environment is different. Like people's physical realities and experiences are different. We're no longer at home, you know, um, smashing the purchase button on things that we can experience from home. We can now go outside, right? And
yeah,
that's not
right,
that's not a new
right.
thing now. But yeah, like I think the volume has changed too. And so it's no longer, a sort of like devastating treadmill run. Now it's just kind of like it's almost like a normal industry again.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and that's so important for our people because, and even for my project that I was started off talking about is that it was a project that was based in spontaneity. And so the idea of me being able to send it to the pressing plant and then actually have the record within a couple of months, right on the release day, it was all part of the excitement for it and part of even the story and the narrative behind it. If in the old days, that was March, I still wouldn't have had the record in my hands today. And I'm over that record. I'm thinking
Yeah.
of something else. So it actually really impacted people's creativity, not to say even of course their income, but for a lot of artists, it was that record that I just got in my hands. It's been out for a year. I mean, that's kind of a problem.
Yeah, I've been thinking about that too, actually, with rap music,
Hmm.
because I think there was some Billboard article floating around talking about how like rap and hip hop doesn't have the same success on vinyl that some other genres do.
Yeah,
And I think some of that is like this kind of the spontaneity you're talking about. I think
right.
that there tends to be more of a culture of like, let me quickly like hop on this song and remix it and like respond to that song. And, there's just like a much quicker pace
Yeah,
to like, I guess like chart success or whatever.
yeah,
And so, it's kind of like, well, maybe rap and hip hop, maybe part of the reason it's not as successful on vinyl is because of those longer lead times. Like, what actually would it take to, like, as far as a number of weeks to make a record for that to actually work really well? So now that we have all this firepower and stuff, and the volume is lower than it was over the pandemic, we're thinking, okay, well, like, what do we do with this?
yeah.
And
That's a
maybe
good point.
one of the things is like, how do we actually bring those turnarounds down even more so that there can be more spontaneous creation that ends up on vinyl?
I
So yeah,
love
anyway,
that.
that's
I
the
love that.
position right
I
now.
appreciate you thinking about that because that's true for so many, it's true for so many different genres, hip hop for sure. I mean, Kanye West is kind of notorious for, allegedly tweaking mixes, re-uploading them to iTunes the night before, that kind of stuff. So yeah, back then the album would have to gestate for a while before he was comfortable to press it to vinyl. So yeah, I can totally see that being the case. Interesting.
Yeah, that's an interesting example and one I thought of too. I wonder what that turnaround would need to be. 4 weeks, 6 weeks, maybe something in that kind of region in order for people to be able to like, you know, capture the moment and have the music be released when it's still in conversation,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah.
That would be a nice turnaround time to get to. And actually I think a lot of it is the print. because you're making a record, it takes about 2 weeks to do the metal work, meaning the cutting and the plating and the test pressings. The pressing itself, I mean, we can make 800 records on a shift, and there's for a single press, an automatic press. And so, if you can do 75,000 units a day, like we can, I mean, actually the pressing time is not the impediment. I think it's the print.
Okay.
So we have an internal print shop, and we're adding machinery so that we can really try and dial that part of it in. Because I think if we can like get the print down to like 10 days or less, then I think we could really make some magic happen with turnarounds overall.
Well, there's also just so many key players too when they're making a big record, and it's what we talk about on the show all the time. And like you're saying, I mean, it's not just the manufacturing, but it would be the decision making on the artwork and the jacket and making sure people are credited. It's one thing to have the masters fly out of the studio from Pro Tools via WeTransfer to you guys in a few seconds, but then in order for it to look good on retail shelves, there's a lot of professionals that I think have to get involved.
Yeah, I mean, I think like, if we were to look at the number of issues that arise from audio versus art, I think that like, art and print, it sounds weird for a record pressing plant to say this, but I mean, I think that like, a lot more resources need to be put in on the troubleshooting side when it comes to art and print. And it's not just the print itself, the die cutting and folding, gluing. It's the things you're talking about getting past art approvals because, oh no, I spelled the bassist name wrong for the third time and he'll quit if I do this again.
Yeah.
Or like, or even actually when it comes to labels reissuing their own material, sometimes those like assets are lost to time, and it tends more to be on the art side. So yeah, like artwork and print, I think are a very important challenge to overcome.
I think you said that
successfully.
I think you said that last time we talked, that the issues, especially with indie artists, it was more in the art files, something not lining up or not using the template properly. And with vinyl, there's so much more. There's so many pieces, right? When I'm sending art off, I'm sending two sides for the labels. I'm sending the front and back as well as the spine, which is usually one piece, but they're all kind of individual in their own way. And then that's just for the absolute basics. If you're doing an inner sleeve, things get pretty complicated. So there's a lot of files. It's not just, a lot of people just think the album cover, but there's a lot of pieces to it.
Yeah. I mean, we're starting a small run program that focuses on 100, 200, and 300. And it's for everybody, but the person we have in mind is someone who doesn't have any experience with vinyl. And so we're mapping out a new workflow on the website to place the order, to specifically guide you just to the templates that you need, and to have a nice sort of like appealing graphic showing how things fit together. I think the education on the art side is something that we should be really invested in, because I mean, like, it is a challenge, and can result in slowdowns if we don't have the right ingredients provided to us. Our team is not like sort of in a binary sense, like just rejecting files if they don't work. We'll try to nudge it into place and make suggestions and point them out when we send the proof. But the art side is needs a lot of consideration.
Well, I have a background in design. I'm comfortable with Photoshop and InDesign and all of these tools. I've pressed vinyl many times. I've made cassettes and CDs many times, and I'll always make a mistake. I'll always forget something on a layer. I'll always do something too small or too big. I always forget about CMYK, and that's coming from me who's done it a few times. So it's so funny, we're having this conversation, we need to move on, but the audio files is like, oh yeah, that part's fine.
Right. That's just vinyl.
That's just the vinyl. Don't worry about that.
Yeah. Right.
Let me ask you talking about these short runs, I'm kind of curious. I want to hear a little bit more about them because of this issue where I see a lot of pressing plants getting into major releases, and it makes me feel insecure. I've talked to you about this before. It makes me feel insignificant. I'm not saying that you've ever made me feel this way or that my rep has ever made me feel this way. And people love to write about this online. I know when there's this, I just feel like there's this issue when there's an issue with my press and I have to call my rep or email my rep, and I'm doing 200 copies. And I know that you're also doing 200,000 copies for Taylor for each color. You know what I mean? And I just feel like I'm not important to you guys as a client. And again, I'm not saying you've ever made me feel that way. It's just how I feel. Yeah. And I think a lot of people in our community feel that. Do you get where that comes from?
Yeah. And I don't know the right words to convey the sentiment that it's totally not how it goes. First of all, there's just completely separate teams for the major label side and the indie side. We have, our indie team is 25, 30 people. I mean, some of them split their time on both sides of the fence, in graphics or whatever.
Sure.
But yeah, I mean, it's it's almost cleaved, right? That there's the major label schedule that needs to happen accordingly. And then there's the indie schedule that needs to happen accordingly. And they don't really clash that much. Also, I feel like, all props to Universal and Warner, they're definitely an important relationship of ours. They're not walking around telling people to use us. They're not sharing records that we've made for them on social media and, sort of enduring community around it. I mean, we built the website to talk to the indies, thinking the majors, they are not really that interested in our storytelling capacities through the website. But if you can connect with the smaller artists, it kind of makes everything work across the board. If the website tools and the portal and, our communication style, if it works for the person who is doesn't make a lot of records or never made records before, then it means that, for the people that are used to the process, that the tools that we built will work for them too. And just getting back to the point of if we make a record for you and it's 200 pieces, you're so much more likely to share that with your friends and talk. People in more independent communities are just naturally sort of sharing information and resources and, experiences. And so I don't know, arguably, I think as far as the relationship impact that we would have in the broader industry, the indies are really the ones that are going to dictate that.
Wow. I find that so interesting, and that's so great to hear. And, it's one thing for you to say, no, indies are important to us, but the proof, you've just given evidence, the fact that you're right. I mean, there's just no way that any of those major artists are going on social media, even holding up a test pressing, let alone talking about, where I got this pressed, so that makes total sense. And then of course, all of the tools that you have, again, the majors are probably not using your quote generator on your website. So that's such a great point, because I was always worried, that 80-20 rule where it's 80% of your revenue comes from 20% of your customers, and probably 80% of your problems come from people like us not knowing what we're doing. So I'm very pleased. I think a lot of us will be pleased to hear that. Comforting.
In our last conversation, we talked about my previous company, Samo, where we were almost exclusively working with the indies. And then, when the vinyl boom really started to take off, the indies just kept getting, chomped up and spat out. And I just don't think I've ever forgotten that. I think it's pissed me off.
Yeah.
And I just won't let it happen at a record plant that I have more responsibility over. Yeah. So yeah, I don't know. I mean, I just spend a lot of time thinking about how to develop the indie side of things, because I feel like it does become very informative for other decisions that we make in various departments and things like that.
Well, and I know you're a fan of indies. I know you're a fan of indie releases. And so you don't want that to go away in the same way I don't want that to go away. We don't want to only help the majors succeed, because then we would lose out on some of our favorite releases.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, who doesn't want to work with stuff that they
that's right.
ground themselves in? I mean, yeah, we want to be part of the community, right? So
Yeah, last time we talked, I'll ask you this after we stop recording, but last time we talked, I was asking you about some of your favorite labels and favorite artists that you would like go after. I'll ask you about that again because it's so fun. I would totally do the same thing. I'd be like, come press with me so that I can I can steal a test pressing of your record. Let me ask you about, we're still talking about indies here. Let me talk to you about quantities, because somebody in our community a long time ago, and again, please tell us a little bit about this short run system you have coming, because somebody a long time ago had talked about, and there's kind of this consensus that 300 is a real magic number for indies. And from my experience, I mean, I think 100 is problematic, because to me, 100, your cost per unit is just so high that 100 is something you're doing if you're only using the records for marketing purposes. It's the same as sinking $1,000 into a billboard. There's no profit to be made. It's just about appeasing a small group of vinyl collectors and then having all of these free copies that you can give away. 200 has been pretty comfortable, but you're still selling them at a cost per unit where there's not a lot of margin, and it's you really have to have a few distributors in place to speak for 20 or 50 or 100 copies. 300, it just seems like, okay, I have my distributor takes 50, this other 5 retail stores take 10 each. And then I can sell 50 to 100 on my own, and then I'll save 50 to 100 for the long tail. So can you tell me like this little mindset here?
it makes sense. When we look at the number of requests coming in via the site on the web quoter you were talking about, we see the most amount of requests come in for 100, but the least amount of people actually proceeding with it. Compared to 100 to 300, which is super interesting.
Yeah.
So then what we did was on the website, when you're working through the quoter, we're so anti hard selling because it's sleazy. But what we do is, if someone has the 100 unit quote in front of them that they built, and it was like, hey, just so you know, right over here at 200, it's actually this amount of dollars per unit, and it's a substantial difference per unit.
Yeah.
So that's kind of how we've been thinking about it before, is just, give people their options, because you're right, at 100, I wouldn't say it's prohibitive, but it's a challenge because all of your fixed setup costs are divided by such a small number, right? Mm-hmm. With the small run program, we've done a couple of things. We've done some experiments on the digital printing side that we've done a little bit before, but didn't push as much as we did recently. One example is the center labels. The center label paper and ink, basically the whole thing, you need to, there needs to be research and development that goes into those choices. It's not just like that anything will work. I can't like rip out a page of a magazine and use that paper. Like it has to be able to withstand the stress of the pressing process and the heat of the oven that the labels get baked in before they go to press, right?
Yeah.
Digital ink, like we had tried and it didn't work before. So we tried a couple of other methods in the digital printing space, and we got to a positive result where we found that actually, using like UV ink, not toner, that actually worked. And so then we thought, wow, we can actually reduce the price of the center labels pretty substantially and just pass on the savings, Same thing with on the jackets. Anyway, basically, what I'm getting at is that we've tried to find ways to reduce the cost of the 100, 200, and 300 to get more people acclimatized to making vinyl, to just like lower the barrier to entry.
Sure.
And so we have these packages now that we're going to debut in the next couple of days, actually.
Wow.
So exclusive.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know what will be released, so maybe it won't be exclusive. But on the 100, it's I'll speak in US dollars because that's top of mind.
Sure.
It's $12.99 for 100. At 200, it is closer to $8. No, it is $8.50. And then at 300, it's $6.66 per unit.
Wow.
And we also beat up FedEx into submissions so that we have really cheap prices that are like a fixed cost going to anywhere in the States. So like $100, $200, and $300. So like $1 a unit for shipping.
Wow.
Um,
Wow.
so anyway, like we've been putting a lot of energy into this program and figuring out how to make sure it runs well and how to ensure that all the turnarounds are 6 weeks.
Hmm.
And so that's the concept. It's these like small run packages we're calling Express. Press being the pun there that
Okay.
I'm trying to
Cute. That's cute.
emphasize. And yeah,
Sponsored by Elon Musk and X. Is that like, is that
well,
where you get it
no.
from? No.
Oh, X. No, no,
Yeah.
no. The EX is in lowercase and the press
Okay.
is in, so
Okay.
we're
Sure. Yeah.
diminishing the Musk contingent of it. Yeah, exactly.
That's good.
So yeah. Anyway, so we're getting set to release those into the market, and we think that's going to be the cheapest price available for those packages.
$12.99. Yeah, that's really cool. And I mean, the thing I like about 100 is like I've done some experimental releases. I've done some acoustic releases or a live release, and I just don't think I could move the traditional 200 and 300 that I'm comfortable with, like on a flagship record. But I still wish I could have done it on vinyl, you know? And so these are kind of those things where it's like, it's going to cost me, like, I think I can make it work. I think I can sell maybe 20 or 30 and to pay for this fun little thing, you know? So I love that. I love that idea.
Yeah, and it's very pared down. It's black vinyl, so we're not offering
Right.
two color, half and half with splatter. Eventually, we want to make more flexible, and
Sure.
we'll aim to do that
Yeah.
early next year. But yeah, another interesting thing to think about with these packages is actually that there's no test pressings; it's test waved as part of that 100, 200, 300.
Oh.
We've had some very interesting conversations about that strategy. And so anyway, that might be interesting for the listeners.
Okay. Let's talk about that for a second. Yes, this is a podcast for nerds, by the way. So don't feel like you have to skip over that part. Okay, that's very interesting. I'm a huge fan of test pressings for a couple reasons. I think they're like historic items. They're one of one or one of five or one of 10 or whatever. I have some from bands that I love that have given to me as a gift, or I found them on eBay, whatever. I also have been super successful with selling my test pressings for. The test pressing I get in 3 months before the record comes out, I'll sell one of them for $100. That they get shipped 3 to 6 months before the record comes out to one person.
Right.
That always sells within a few minutes, and then on release day, I can sell the other ones for $50. So it takes a huge bite out of my manufacturing costs because of these fans that I'm so grateful for. So. That's a little bit sad about that. But also tell me, you guys do digital test pressing. So are you still going to play it back for the artists and they can listen to the WAV file?
Well, not for these packages with that price point specifically, because the digital test pressings, you have to make physical test pressings and then record them digitally.
Okay.
So
there's no difference.
The only cost saving there is that you're not paying to ship them, which is like $40 US on a 2-day.
But it does
you're
take
also sort of like saving time with them.
Yeah, maybe 3 to 4 weeks, right? Of approval, shipping, and stuff. Which is nice.
It's like if you're in, I don't know, broken social scene and there's 12 of you or something, you know what I mean? Like passing a digital file to everyone is easier than trying to get everyone together, whoever the stakeholders are for the pressing. But this is actually something different. So GZ is our parent company.
Mm-hmm.
You know that.
Yep.
They have developed some custom software called AQA. And the AQA system, what it does is, nerd fans of the podcast will be into this part of it. So you make 2 copies of the record, be it test pressings or final copies. And what you do is that with these 2 copies, you put them in the AQA system. So it's a computer system with 8 turntables on it, right? And so you have, so it's sort of octopus-like in its physical appearance. You take, let's say, the A side of the first record and the A side of the second record, right? So these are 2 records from the same run.
Yeah.
And what the system does is that when you record it in real time, each of these, the system compares the 2 of them as a waveform along with the waveform of the digital master. And with those three waveforms, what it can do is analyze the differences and point to all types of anomalies and grade them in terms of them being like distracting or non-distracting or minor. And it doesn't remove the actual audio quality engineer from listening to the record. It just points them in the directions of things they need to make decisions about. So that's an important thing to mention in the sense that like catching anomalies, like serial issues, so serial issues being like it happens on A1 30 seconds in on both of these copies, aha, there's something wrong with the metalwork. And so there's just like a faster, more objective way of actually discovering these things, meaning less things are leaking out of the process.
And it's comparing it to the digital file. So saying, oh, that's an anomaly, but it was in the digital file. In some cases.
Also, correct. And also there's something called eccentricity too. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that term as it relates to records. You probably are, but I mean, so let's say you punch the stamper slightly off center and the record is going in and out a bit, right? So that it's actually, the record is off center and it's sort of, making these wow and flutter sort of sounds.
Okay.
The system can compare that to the digital master to see how far out it is. So there's other benefits to that too. Anyway, all that to say that this is how we're quality controlling, the final product leaving the plant. And this is how GZ has been quality controlling the test pressings as well. And what it means is that there's actually like a much tighter QC process around the final product. If we're making test pressings, if GZ catches it at that moment, they're going to axe it and then make new ones. Through this process and through experience and also data collection, the test pressing approval rating is close to 97%. And I've seen actually like graphs and data to affirm that. So it means
compared to what?
Well, it's 97% in the fact that 3% of test pressing claims are actually acknowledged that there was some issue, some like operator failure or something like that would actually require us to then redo it.
What was that number before you implemented this digital system is what I'm asking.
That's a good question. I don't actually have that data. So I'm more just sort of focusing on the
fact
it's
cool.
That,
it's very cool.
It's a great question. Yeah. I should dig into that. Anyway, none of this like totally negates the idea of making test pressings. But when we look at that, like at the sort of bigger picture, and we can see that for, the 100, 200, and 300 runs where, again, there's going to be a lot of people who aren't as familiar with the process, who, you hand test pressings to them and you say, this is on you, pal. You better listen to be real careful.
Yeah.
You do end up engaging. Yeah, you do end up engaging in a lot of sort of like lengthier conversations that are actually like fully resolvable outside of making new metalwork. So we think that for these low run packages, given that 97% approval rating, that we feel very confident about offering a really fast turnaround. And that for the 3% of issues that we discover, we'll just remake the records. We've sort of built that into a buffer. Now, if I were making like let's say, a more like a release with a higher quantity, 300, 500, 1,000, etc., I would get test pressings, right?
Okay.
And there just might be more sort of like, I don't know. I mean, it's a bigger quantity, it's a bigger investment. So maybe more insurance is important there. And as you say, you want to have test pressings to sell.
Yeah. So are you saying that people at any quantity can now opt to waive the test pressing option?
Well, that was always the case.
Right.
But it seems like, for the low run program where we want to make it really accessible and easy for people and keep the timeline ticking and also vouch for the quality, that this is like an entirely safe thing to do, which I think is actually kind of progressive. I think it will actually, I think in a lot of cases, outside of when people, for small runs, outside of when they're actually selling and marketing the test pressings, I think this is actually a way to, sort of like achieve that more spontaneous sort of thing that you were talking about, and also have people have a more affordable package for people.
That's right. And yet still have that peace of mind, because I know like I've waived, digital proofs of the artwork and stuff, just being like, I think it'll be okay. It's so, and knowing that there's been a lot of times where you guys have, whether it's been an artwork or it's actually been on the digital file or sorry, the audio file, where you guys have emailed me back and said, just so you know, this track seems like quieter than the others, or like there is some sort of like adjusting that you guys are doing for us. For me, it hasn't showed up on an invoice. And so it's kind of nice that you catch it instead of just like, even though you know it's going to be a problem, pressing it to a test pressing and then me discovering that issue. So that happened on the last release. I had a little instrumental track that was too quiet.
Right. And that's the thing, is that like the tracks are being analyzed in the cutting room before cutting. And so if there's a track list issue or some other oddity, we're pointing it out. When we go to make the records, we have this AQA system that, you know, with very fine precision, is able to pinpoint audio anomalies for an engineer to, so, you know, like if we're doing our job there, and the 97% data continues as it should, then yeah, for these small run packages, it seems like a total no-brainer to offer it to people this way.
I'm so glad that we're having this conversation about the importance of vinyl and the quickness of vinyl as it relates to an artist's creativity and their creative output, because this project, and I'm not self-promoting here, I don't care, but this project, it's just personal to me because it was a spontaneous thing that has never happened to me and probably will never happen again. But the act of pressing it to vinyl made it feel real. I think just uploading it to Bandcamp, and that's why I honestly think vinyl is so popular, is uploading it to Bandcamp or even to Spotify. That can be done quickly. That's no problem. But to have that come back, I just felt like it really legitimized what I had done and cemented it. And it just was this whole piece that really felt powerful. It inspired me as a creative.
It's nice to hear that artists and labels still connect to it that way. I mean, you put out so many releases now and you still feel that. And like, yeah, there's like, I think that there's a ceremony to the vinyl release that, you know, that is not like fully actualized on the digital side of things. As you say, like, you know, you're uploading something to Bandcamp and it's not meaningless by any stretch, but it doesn't have that kind of like, you know, sort of like, you know, break the line across the end of the
that's right.
on type of feel to it that the vinyl release does. Cause it's like, well, this is like a real document of the music now, you know, it's like a physical thing that is now, you know, sort of like, well, as you say, like legitimizing the music to some extent. I mean, vinyl clearly is not the only way to legitimize your music.
No, I know. And that's a kind of an elitist thing to say. Yeah. But it does feel like, you know, vinyl or it didn't happen. To me, it's like, I've got to, I know that's so elite to say, but it's, and it could be cassettes too. I get the same feeling from cassettes. So I'll just throw that out there as well.
I almost do. I mean, like so I will listen to streaming services to figure out what I love, and then I will buy what I love on vinyl. And I've done that a few times with cassettes, although sparingly. And it just doesn't get me out of bed the same way, you know?
I agree. But for others, it does.
Sure. Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
And same with CDs.
I don't mean to diminish it. It's just for me.
Yeah, no, I know what you, I totally know what you mean. Because I order the same ones you do and they come in the mail and yeah, it's a different feeling. I want to talk to you about vinyl. And I'm so excited about this QA process that happens beforehand, because I remember when this record came in, and I think I talked to you about this before, and I had a great chat years ago with someone from Ghostly about how nerve-wracking it is to get a shipment from the plant and cutting the seal and taking out a record. And my wife was standing by and I was like, don't talk to me, please. Like, I'm sweating buckets here. And I'm like, I take out the record. And I remember the very first record I put on, and there was a noise, like not a nice noise somewhere on the record. And I was like, my heart sank. And I ran to the box. I quickly opened another one, exact same spot, and the sound wasn't there. And I was like, thank God. And even just like dusting that record, and the sound was gone. And it was like, okay, phew, we're all right. Flip it over. The songs are there. And now I can finally enjoy it. You know, that feeling is like, I don't know if other people feel that feeling. Same thing with artwork too. gosh. And I'm not like worried that you guys have made a mistake. I'm often worried that I've made a mistake. And so it comes at a cost. Having those big physical items come at a stress cost. But then once
Yeah,
it's done,
I can understand the anxiety. There's so much wrapped up in it. I mean, not only is it all the money spent, because you're spending 1,000 or more and not 100
yeah,
or more,
yeah,
but
yeah,
yeah, it's just all this build up to the like the actual event. Um, I can understand that, but yeah, like I think that is well, you've got to come to the plant and see that this like AQA software. It's a cool thing to look at. We've made a video on the site that's more animation based because we thought that was just like a more engaging and interesting way um, to understand the system and the process. And again, it's like not the kind of thing where it's like, okay, well now this is all like AI and machine learning.
yeah,
This is a tool to help the people listen to figure out where those issues are going to be. See, because the thing is like, if the same pop occurs on like a very sparse, lush, Billie Eilish ballad or something like that, compared to like, the new Carcass album or something, which is like a grindcore onslaught. This happens across plants and all across the industry. There's a decision made based on how distracting or noticeable that pop might be, and there's all kinds of factors there. It's like, what effect was used. So if it's like 3 types of splatter, we're expecting more noise. If it's very quiet material and the side is very long, then we're going to have to cut it quietly to make it fit safely, which has the illusion of a higher noise floor. So there's like a lot of subjective factors that you apply in the quality room, in addition to like objective standards, where like physical issues like warpage or a scratch are measured in millimeters and there's a strict tolerance there. So
wow,
yeah, anyway, it's like magic and science, like in that quality room. It's not strictly one or the other.
Well, and I know that you still have a human being who's going to see these flags, these red flags, yellow flags, and address them. And that's so important because, if you catch someone on a Monday morning after a busy weekend, they might miss something. They're human beings. And so, I think that's great. I think that's really encouraging to hear.
And like headphone fatigue too. That's a real thing, right?
Yep. Yeah, absolutely.
Listening on headphones for 8 hours a day, like your brain tends to filter some things out after a while.
For sure. Let's talk about bands. I know you're at a different place in the whole vinyl chain, but what are some factors that help an indie band sell their records that you've noticed? Like, is there a common denominator that you've seen in artists or labels who do a good job at getting rid of their units?
That's a very good question. I remember the last time we talked, we were speaking about variant exclusives, and both, I think I made the comment that I felt like the majors were far ahead of the indies in that regard. And I feel like that's changed over time. I think that like there are stores like, Newbury Comics and, other sort of like ones that I sort of am failing to recall off the top of my head now.
Yeah. Maybe Grimy or Criminal.
Like, yeah. Right.
Yeah.
Where, you make a variant exclusive to them or a variant exclusive to Ford. And so anyway, I feel like that's continued to prosper since we spoke. The other thing is, I think like we've been thinking a lot about fulfillment too, about how to get records into the hands of buyers easier, and if we could participate there. So maybe this isn't quite answering the question, but it is something we've been working on too. We're a Canadian plant. You're a Canadian guy, so you know this.
Yeah.
But maybe to some of the listeners, they're not familiar with our geography. We also have a plant in Nashville as well, and we're thinking about how to leverage that as far as making it accessible and cheap to get records out to record buyers directly. And so we're going to introduce this like media mail service where we're going to send out the records to our sister plant there, and then have them picked up by USPS to deliver to record fans individually. So
that's huge.
Anyway, I guess. Yeah, so I think the fulfillment and e-com side, I think like, artists and labels who are more sophisticated in that kind of realm tend to see broader successes, especially since, distro is obviously critical, but if you've got a great like, e-com and fulfillment thing going for yourself, then those are records that you're selling um, at a higher price point, as opposed to wholesale. So artists figuring out a good mix of both of those things, I think, like, tend to come back for reorders.
Well, fulfillment is so key because the absurdity of when I send when you ship me right now, we're nearby, so I can pick them up. But there are times where you're pressing a record in, let's say, California, and then you ship it to you, and then you sell it back to someone back in California, and you now have to ship it back. So it's not absurd for a record to cross the continent a few times just to get to the end user. And that is stacking up all of these shipments. And because I'm in Canada, we have a lot of international orders. So I have to charge something ridiculous like $25 US to ship it to Japan.
Yeah.
I do that all the time.
Yeah.
I feel bad about it. It's about the same price I'm charging for the record itself. But what else can I do? And so that is really interesting to hear, because I know America has a little bit better of a domestic shipping than we do, but the amount, and I think from an environmental standpoint too, it's better that instead that they're not shipping back there, then back and all across. That is really cool to hear.
Yeah, we're exploring what we're going to do about Europe too, but I've talked to some record labels who say, if you can figure that out for me, I would love you forever.
Yes.
Because of what you're talking about, that it's just so expensive to get records out there. Our parent company is in Europe. There's another related company that is also in the fulfillment space there. Just feels like there's puzzle pieces for us to put together in that sense. And so I feel like that could be, that's going to be a real direction for us next year.
Absolutely. That is so cool to hear. Let's talk about price for a second, because I feel like I've been kind of underpricing my records for a while, because I've always just kind of set that $20 mark. Well, let's talk in US funds here, but I kind of always just thought $20. I don't know why, because like merch tables, it was always $10 for CDs, $20 for record. You think in like what people have in their wallets. And now obviously us as customers, we go to a record store, any new release from Merge or Sub Pop is going to be probably $39.99 now. That might be in Canadian, and but still it's a high priced item. And so I feel like some of us indies need to maybe push the price up a little bit to help with create a margin just to begin with. So do you have any thoughts on like price? Like where should we be pricing them? I don't think it's right to maybe follow the major indies model or to follow the major label models. I think there are some ridiculous prices out there, but any insights to where we should be pricing our records if we're doing 200 to 300?
Not a very informed one.
Okay, so that's fine. Just your opinion.
But I was, I was in New York yesterday, just on like a family thing, and I snuck away to go to some record stores. While they went to a Broadway play or something, I don't know. And I was sort of like, there were some records I wanted to get. And one of them was like a single LP, and it was selling for 40 US. And I did the conversion in my head, and I was like, I can't. Like, it just seemed like it was like harder for me to justify that purchase. And then I found the same record elsewhere for, about $30. And I was like, okay, that feels like about right. And that was 30 US, and even then, like, I felt like, okay, I can like basically tolerate this, So from an uninformed perspective, because I don't know what goes into, marketing campaigns and other sort of auxiliary costs outside of strict manufacturing, because there's other considerations. And of course, you have like record stores needing to make a sustainable margin and distros. And
that's fair.
I know a little less about that. But kind of feels to me, like when I'm buying something for $30, that kind of feels like within a tolerable range. Personally, I also think from the manufacturing perspective, it's sort of almost obvious to see where this is coming from, because we had to raise our price over the pandemic like 3 different times, and it felt like shit because every time we did it, it was just like, here it comes again. And it was because of the things we were talking about earlier in the conversation, like board products that just weren't like things were happening, like the center label stock that we were using. the mill who was providing it said, well, we're basically selling out of everything because people are just buying paper and board for packaging products that are going to sell on Amazon, and everything is flying off the shelves. So why don't we actually just like deprioritize the paper stocks that are not making us as much money?
Oh.
And so we would then be overnight forced to use more expensive, stock, and we were in a race like everyone else. And so that's part of the reason why we had to keep raising prices. And like I said, all that stuff is gone now.
Yeah.
In my experience, I'm seeing some vinyl compound prices starting to come down. We just acquired back in May a vinyl compound manufacturing company and added that to our group of 3 plants. So now there's 4 companies as part of the GZ North America umbrella. And making compound ourselves and doing it domestically meant that it was cheaper for us. And so we lowered our price by 15 cents US per disc in September.
I saw that. I got that email that you guys had lowered your price. That was a weird email to get.
It was weird, right? And I think plants do this now, right?
Yeah.
If not us, who else? Because if some labels will continue, if we continue to do that and some labels don't react accordingly, that's none of our business, I guess. But the paper and board prices have not come down the way that the compound has. And so that one, it feels like all those, it feels that industry is really clawing on to the, margins that, they were not used to making pre-pandemic. And I don't know as much about, the insider workings of those. So maybe someone in that industry will say I'm being unfair, but I have not seen the board prices drop to the extent where we can say, okay, now we're going to lower the price on the print too. But that's part of our mandate next year is to try and find out, can we actually reduce prices without slashing our margin? Because if we slash our margin, then we just have a less sustainable business.
That's right.
But
that's right.
If we find cost savings and then we lower the price accordingly, then that seems like something that should happen. And then maybe it'll have the trickle down effect of records becoming, 20 or 25 instead of 30, 35 or something like that.
So we were talking earlier about the issues that the artwork can give, not just us making the artwork, but also you guys as well. And then the board prices and stuff. Do you ever see a future where we can separate the record, which by the way, contains the music, but can we separate the record from the artwork? Are they just too married together in the history of vinyl? But is there a way? I know I've seen people in those plastic sleeves. A lot of dance labels will just do paper.
Yeah.
But that, for me as a music collector, I don't love that. The artwork is so important. So, but is there a future, do you think?
We're having an internal conversation about that. Ian, who's on our indie team, he's been really championing that thing that you're talking about, which is a blank white die cut record jacket.
Yeah.
Put that in a bag, put a sticker on it. I think it is interesting for the electronic and dance side of things. It's a little harder for me to see a lot of bands adopting that because the art is such a critical piece of the physical experience of buying and interacting with vinyl. But I mean, there definitely is a market for that kind of thing. I just wonder how expansive it is,
Yeah, it's a good point because there's this alleged quote, which I'm sure we can all argue with, about that 50% of American vinyl buyers don't own a record player. I doubt it, but whatever.
Oh, you doubt that? Yeah.
50%. Well, first of all, how'd they get such a nice round number? But I don't know.
Fair.
I guess maybe if Taylor sold 1 million, right, last year of Midnights. So do all 1 million of those don't have a record player? I don't know. Yeah, I do doubt that. I told this anecdote recently. I was at this record store at McMaster University. You know where that is, but there was the guy who travels around to the universities and sells records, used records, and this place was packed at 9 a.m. with 20-year-olds spending hundreds of dollars on old records. And I'm like, people are buying records. It is crazy. Right. And young people, it is crazy. And they all have turntables. And so anyway, what was my point? I'm off now. But I just going back to the artwork is I do think that if there are people who are buying it without a turntable, I don't think they would be buying it in just a white sleeve.
Right. Good point. Yeah, I think it's for a community of like vinyl heads that probably exist outside of electronic music as well. I
Mm.
mean, like a lot of rap singles would, come that way too, like DJ singles. I think that there's definitely a market for it and it should be explored, and maybe that would make for more affordable records too. But I think you're right to point to that 50% or 42 or
Wait, do you agree with it? Do
65
you
or
think it's
whatever
real?
it is. I don't, that's interesting you say that because I've never really sort of like mentally disputed it. I more had an existential sort of wrestling match in my brain to be like, is that a terrible number or is that
Yeah.
fine? Um, and I really try and sort of like reduce any notions of gatekeeping that I find myself having. It's one of those things like an intrusive thought where I'm like
Yeah.
out.
Yeah.
And
I
so,
know. I know.
my first thought is, oh no, if only half the people who are buying records have a turntable, how likely is it that they will continue to buy records if they're not actually using them?
Good point.
And then I tried to put myself in the mindset of someone, maybe like a Taylor Swift fan, like you're talking about, who's buying the record for wholly different reasons,
Mhm.
because they're connecting with the artist, because they picked it up at a show, and it means something to them. And
Mhm.
I guess I just maybe for like a younger generation of like vinyl fans, maybe they're not interacting with it in the exact same way that like you or I are, and maybe that's okay, So
Yeah.
like,
Yeah. It's fair.
I mean, yeah, as long as our industry has like a good, healthy beating pulse, like then I think that we'll all find our ways to participate and enjoy it.
Yeah.
So I've sort of gotten past the fact that that's a bad statistic, and now just thinking like, yeah, I feel like people are just sort of like, I don't know, they want it as like a souvenir of their experience or as something that this says something about their identity. It's the reasons why people collect all kinds of stuff, and people collect things that they, how often when people are buying books, when they're collecting those, are they reading them every?
The stats for those the stats are insane. Like it's like 80-90% of books are never finished. Yeah.
Right. So, I mean, how is vinyl actually really that different? I mean, you
Totally
have a
agree.
collection of something, and you're buying it out of some form of like expression of your interests, like you
What
do with books, right?
what percentage of pianos in people's living rooms are played? You know what I mean?
Oh no, I have a piano I have a digital piano
Yeah.
in my living room that
There you
hasn't
go.
been played in a month. So
There you
yeah,
go.
for sure.
Well, it's interesting though. Here's another stat I want to ask you about. I'm not a journalist, so I don't stand behind these numbers, but I read it in The Economist. But we have 160 million records that were manufactured last year. Allegedly, they and I don't know if that's worldwide or North America. There was a demand for upwards of 400 million. I don't know if that's true either, but let's say we manufacture 160 million. We've sold 45 million last year. So potentially there's 110, 120 missing records. And so my question is, again, stupid. I don't know where those numbers are, so don't hold me to it. My question though is, are people pressing too many records, i.e. major labels, or are there indie artists who are pressing records that shouldn't be pressing records, that are not yet at that stage in their career? I know that's a dumb question to ask you in your job, but I know you're an honest person, so you'll answer it. And we do have a lot of records in garages, places. So what are your thoughts on that? Is there maybe those records are being sold by indies and maybe it's majors, or maybe we shouldn't be pressing vinyl?
I don't think it's all majors by a long shot. I think what happened was, and I feel like I'm on very confident ground saying this because I have visited like so many record labels in the last year and asked them about their experience. Because since the pandemic receded, I've been able to travel again, and I want to like get out from behind my computer and say thanks to record labels that work with us. And I've heard from several medium-sized indies that they overordered last year, and it makes sense because they like take yourself back to 2021 or 2022, let's say 2022, where getting a record made on average across the industry would take 8 to 12 months. Now, let's say you have like a new release or a catalog item that's like, really popular. to do a reorder would probably take the same amount of time, another 8 months, right? Oh, but you've got the metalwork done. Well, it doesn't matter. You're just waiting in front, in a traffic jammed lineup to get in front of a record press like a new order. So basically what I'm saying is, if it took you 8 months to get 5,000 made, and it would take you 16 months to get another 5,000 after that, and the record seems like it's got life to it now, you're going to order 10,000 today, right?
Oh.
In that environment. And a lot of record labels were put in a situation where that felt like the necessary thing to do because they didn't want to have the release lose steam and be out of inventory. And because records were flying off the shelves in those years, it was a very safe bet. So now that the world is kind of like, I don't know, had some sort of, correction to the mean, I guess, in many ways. And in many ways, obviously, it hasn't. There are labels that are kind of like stuffed with inventory at the moment.
Yeah.
Now,
okay.
Yeah. So anyway, I think that's the story of this year. Maybe your statistics are from last year. So maybe my
that's
anecdote
what they are. 2022 numbers. Yeah.
Okay. So but in that sense, maybe like there is some mix and match of that. But maybe actually, even if that's not related, I feel like it's an interesting thing to meditate on because I feel like that's been the story of 2023 for the vinyl industry overall, is that the volume has been less. And I think that it seems like records are still selling reasonably well, but that the labels have just like a lot of overstock at the moment. And that is not exclusive to the major labels.
Do you predict, and we're getting close to the end of 2023, do you predict that, like, I think it's every year for the past 20 years almost, that the vinyl sales have gone up, certainly in dollar amounts. Do you think that will continue? Do you think 2023 will see a continued bump?
I've been hearing that it was the best record store day, in history. Someone told me that. I've also heard like bits of information that, the growth will still be there, but it will be like low double digits, like 10%.
Yeah.
I don't think the vinyl industry, I don't think the manufacturers are seeing that. I think that it's a more competitive environment. There's more plants now because a lot of record pressing plants started over the pandemic when there was a real problem to solve. And the same problem doesn't exist today because the turnaround times are reduced. There's enough capacity for everybody. So there's a bit of a disconnect in terms of like sales in the real world. And then on the manufacturing side, record pressing plants are like under with their capacity utilization, including us.
Wow.
So yeah, I mean, I'd be really interested to hear more from people on the retail side than the manufacturing side, because I know what the manufacturers are saying.
Yeah, well, that's interesting. So there does need to be an equilibrium that hopefully we can get to, and maybe we'll see. Are you? This is a dumb question, but are you long on vinyl? Like, do you think? I mean, it's just been going and growing and growing, quantity-wise, revenue-wise. I tell you, Paul, that experience at McMaster, seeing those kids who were, when I got into vinyl late in life, who were maybe 5 years old, like to see these people, and they were obsessed with digging for stuff. And I remember there was this young girl, and like just like super cool looking, trendy, and she's digging for vinyl, and she's got her headphones on. And this guy comes up to her and taps her on the shoulder and starts to like, they know each other, and starts to like flirt with her, and is like, he's like, "Do you even own a turntable?" And she's like, totally like brushing him off, like, "Please leave me alone. I'm working here." And she's got a stack of records. Like, she's spending $200 or $300. And I was just like, I couldn't believe what I was seeing was this, like, these people being so young and so interested in this medium. It was just so exciting for me. It was so encouraging. And anyway, I just feel like that's like one silly anecdote, but I just feel like this thing has legs.
What are the stats on turntable sales year over year?
Sorry, I don't know. Yeah, it's a good question.
Yeah, well, I mean, I feel like I should know that too, but I think that can tell a story. I mean, as much as only 50% of people own a turntable, whatever, but I am interested to see the numbers on turntable stats, because if that number is growing, it does show more people are getting involved.
Well, you can't have the turntable stats. Sorry to interrupt. It can't have the turntable stats because they're coming from garage sales and from Facebook Marketplace.
Right.
You know what I mean? That's how do you measure that? You could measure Crosley's on Amazon, which do sell really well, but I think that'd be a hard thing to get.
But couldn't you say the same thing about record sales? Because a
Yeah.
lot of records
Okay.
are
Good point.
garage
Good point.
sales,
So
too.
I bet you they could build that in. You're right. If
Yeah.
you were, if Audio Technica could say we sold this many units, somebody would be able to estimate how many units were bought from yard sales.
Yeah.
Yeah. Good point.
Yeah, perhaps.
Good point.
But yeah, I guess getting back to the small run program, like it is kind of a thought to be like, how do we like broaden the floor or lower the floor,
Yes.
get more people involved? And like if 100 records are $12.99 or whatever, 200 or $8.50, is that the number that's actually pushing a band to think like, okay, I can do this, you know? And therefore you have like just more people making records and it just becoming like a thing that, I don't know, like a newer generation feels like is within their means.
Yeah.
So yeah, like I guess like it seems like, you know, it seems like the kids are interested, but we need to just make sure that it's like accessible, like hopefully on the retail side, hopefully on the manufacturing side, right? And the reduction of costs in a still inflationary environment is, I think, like where the industry really needs to be focused on, you know? If we can make records cheaper through things like the small run program and the vinyl compound and maybe lowering our print prices next year, which we're dedicated to doing, then maybe it can like, you know, continue to be accessible for people. It has to be accessible essentially, right? In order for people to continue being interested.
Wow. This has been so much fun. So much fun. I could do this for hours. I know our audience could do this for hours too, because it's so interesting. And I hope that we've provided some, you know, some problem solving, because this is something that I think is really desired by a lot of people to go down this road. And it's something they kind of work their way towards earning, you know, like to being able to either afford it or to justify it, because it is something that a lot of people really love. And I'm excited to see younger generations and older generations, by the way, like people in their 50s and 60s are still buying vinyl just as much, and everybody in between. So I think that's really, really, really cool. Anyway, thank you as always for sharing your wisdom on this topic. I've got another 50 questions, but we'll save it for part 3.
Part 3, man. Yeah. Let's definitely keep it rolling. Let's do a part 3 whenever you want.